Hey everyone, MLive's Brendan Quinn here alongside colleague, local hero, Nick Baumgardner, Michigan football beat writer. This is episode 4 of the Wolverine Beat. We're going to keep this thing going. I think make it a full feature for the season.
Yeah, like a weekly thing, I think.
A weekly deal. People have been pretty receptive to it, so we'll tweak here, we'll tweak there, but we're going to just keep this thing going. Kind of a free form, rambling mess of a half an hour or so, where we just kind of delve into all things Michigan sports. So this week, one of the things we really wanted to get into was obviously with the season coming, Michigan's opener versus Utah creeping up on the horizon here. Let's kind of dive into the offense today. Obviously starts with quarterback and the conversation that won't end anytime soon. It doesn't seem like Jake Rudock or Shane Morris or a wild card,
right.
Well, but probably unlikely. It's probably down to those two. Yeah. Nick, I mean, we're not, as anyone watching this knows, we're not in practice. We're not able to see exactly what's going on every day. It is shut down over there. But I guess when it comes to what the coaches are looking for, probably just consistency at this point, and reliability maybe.
It's reliability, and basically, I think more than anything else, I think it's trust to find a player who's consistently doing, I guess, the right things, and maybe more so than that, a player who can consistently avoid disaster, for the lack of a better term. I mean, that's easier said, maybe easier said than done, or whatever. But that's been a huge problem here, over the last few years, and that comes down to not just turning the ball over, but also taking sacks, doing just stupid things to get the offense behind schedule. Because again, there's a lot of changes within the program, but at the end of the day, the changes in the offense, there'll be some fundamental changes here and there, but for the most part, it's still a similar concept. And that, ironically, Brady Hoke was constantly trying to run Jim Harbaugh's offense. He never really figured it out, but that's what they were ultimately trying to do. And Jim Harbaugh's offense is more of a slower moving offense. It's you have to. We've said this before many times, stay on schedule, which means you can't get behind the sticks. If you get behind the sticks, you're screwed, more or less. There's just not as much opportunity to make up for that when you're not running a play every 10 seconds, like maybe a spread does. So the ability to make sure you take the easy one, make sure you make sure that 3 yards is fine sometimes. I've heard some of these coaches already say a 3-yard, 4-yard play might be the best thing you did all day, because it avoided a disaster. So finding a guy who can consistently do that, and that's why I usually keep coming back to Jake Rudock as the answer. But at the same time, it does seem to me that Shane Morris has matured an awful lot in 1 year, and I think that maybe something in his head has clicked that it's really kind of a go time for him at this point.
Everyone that I heard speak at media day, the older guys on the team, when it came to Shane, all really spoke to that he was very, I guess, in the coaching change and all that stuff, he was very hands-on. He was trying to be the, I am the quarterback, I am the leader. I guess my biggest question will be, was when it comes down to it, if going into the opener at Utah, if they say, okay, Jake Rudock will be more consistent and give us a better chance to win this game today, Shane Morris in 6 weeks could be the better quarterback for Michigan football. What did they do? I mean,
they would go to Shane Morris in 6 weeks or however long. I mean,
they wouldn't just let him start it.
That would not. Well, I mean, if it's something where it's like you said, like if it's a situation where they wrap up 3.5 weeks and they've got a spot where they got to pick between two guys. Shane Morris has a higher ceiling than Jake Rudock. I mean, I don't think I'm surprising anybody when I say that. Physical talents are better for the most part. So, but if he can't get it together, mentally and get himself on the right page, then it's a moot point. But at the same time, I do think there's a value or a point in that, in saying that if they get to the Utah game and they feel like, well, Jake Rudock's, I don't want to say lesser of two evils, but if he's the safer bet, then you go with him. But if the team is still, if it's a stale moving thing, then they are not going to hesitate at all to make any kind of position switch. And if it's something where I think that whoever loses that job will be told, that guy is one bad day away from being out of the chair. And whoever the quarterback is going to have to spend, I think, most of the year kind of, peeking over the shoulder. I think that's just going to happen all year, especially this year.
It'll probably be a much easier situation for Michigan in terms of a quarterback sensibilities for it to be Morris. And you risk maybe losing Rudock for the year, but he's a 1 year rental. If Rudock gets the job with O'Korn on the horizon and another competition next year, if Morris doesn't get the job, you risk.
Yeah, you
probably risk losing him.
You
I
do,
think.
and
mentally or
at that point, I think
in
it would be
real time.
everything. You'd risk. I mean, and I don't know. I can't get into Shane Morris's head any easier
Sure,
than I get into
sure,
Jim Harbaugh's, but
sure.
you know, I would think that the
I would
risk
love
there.
to see you in Jim Harbaugh's head.
It would be kind of a mess, I think. But the risk there would be, you're right. I mean, if Shane Morris can't get it this year, then at some point in his own head and the people around him, they would start to ask, well, then what are you really doing? Because you're about to be a senior after this year. You couldn't do it that year, so it's kind of like, what's the point? So it's a big risk in that maybe you don't care. I don't know. Maybe if you're Michigan, you say, fine, whatever. We got other guys coming in.
Sure.
And that's also part of it too. So, yeah, I mean, I just think it'll be an ongoing thing. I think this competition will. When they say there's no end date, I think that there'll be an end date where they name a guy that starts week 1. But I don't think that closes the book on anything. I really don't. I think it'll be something that we'll have to monitor for the most part throughout the year.
The interesting thing is before we get into the specifics of the running back battle, do you think there is and I was trying to get guys to talk about this last week, and everyone kind of acknowledged it, but said, you know, maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it, but the instability that would come with having, you know, in a training camp, okay, if you have a quarterback battle, that's one thing. If you have a running back battle, that's one thing.
Yeah. If you have everything.
At the same
Receivers
time,
too.
right, and the receivers, but to have that in the backfield, that level of instability where I'd have to think, if you're Jake Butt, at any given time, you're lined up at tight end, having to think, okay, wait a second, who's at quarterback? Who's lined up at tailback? You know, what are the different tendencies guys have and things like that? What's your take on that?
In certain areas that might not matter as much. I think it would matter with the quarterback and the receivers, maybe more than anything, because that would be the one thing. And we talked a little bit about that with Jed Fish, and he said it'll be a challenge because they're going to rotate a ton of guys early, and for all we know at this point, and honestly at this point it's Tuesday when we're filming this. That whittling down a quarterback has started. I mean, that's not going to last more than a couple days. Sometimes it lasts a day, and that's it, and they figure it out. So, so that already starts. So you're not going to do 8 guys getting snaps 4 or 5 days into practice. That's not going to happen. But at the same time, you're still going to do. Even if you only have 2, then you got 2 guys. One's left-handed, one's right-handed, and you got a bunch of receivers all fighting for a spot, and it's all over the place. I mean, it's going to be. It's hard to develop timing in a quarterback position, competition that extends for 3 weeks. Or if you're 3 weeks in, you still got 2 guys going. Or 2 weeks in, you still got 2 guys going. Especially at receiver, not so much at running back. I don't think. Maybe a little bit. I think you can stretch that one out a lot longer. But the quarterback receiver deal to me, especially once you get past Amara Darbo, you gotta have to start making a decision somewhere along the lines of at least narrow that group down to a small core of let these guys work together more, and then we'll figure it. If somebody else impresses later, we can always slot them in. But some timing has to be developed, otherwise it could get a little difficult.
Well, the uncertainty at wide receiver, and I can't, just given what I saw last year, and I know Cole's apparently a very nice player and all that stuff, but just going from what I saw last year, I don't see breakaway speed. I don't see a lot of things that says anyone could jump up and emerge out of that group, which in my mind makes running back, which is already a very interesting spot, absolutely crucial. I mean, I don't see right now how this team can go out and throw it. If they wanted to air it out, I don't see how they could throw it 60% of the time. I think you have to be
the running game
heavier on the running game. They need stability on the line, and whether it's by committee or if one guy actually wins that job, it's looking to me like it's going to be a power running game one way or another.
Yeah, I don't think it even as much matters necessarily who. I mean, yeah, they'd like to have one guy, obviously, but at the same time, I feel like, and Harbaugh has said it many times, if they can get 3 that are competent. And they have an offensive line that knows what it's doing, then they'll be okay.
Sure.
And I don't think when I say
Nothing
that,
wrong with fresh legs.
I mean, it'd be beneficial for them obviously to find a star there, somebody that's a horse that they could really rely on, that could really change a game or make game-changing runs and that type of stuff. But worst case scenario, if they've got 3 guys in that group who really know what they're doing and can be trusted, I think they'll be okay with that. If the offensive line, which to their benefit, now we'll see how it works, but that's a spot where I don't think there's a whole lot of. I mean, yeah, there's going to be some competition, and somebody, if they could take a step back and maybe lose a spot. But I think for the most part, it's the same 5 with Eric Magnuson in there that we saw a year ago. Ben Braden, I think, is playing inside at guard now, that's a bit of a change. And Ben Braden's going to have to prove himself at guard. But I think you've got consistent guys in Mason Cole and Graham Glasgow and Kyle Kalis. And Kyle Kalis is in that group now. The staff has raved about him since spring. They really think he's taken that step he needs to take. So there's 3 guys. Eric Magnuson, I think, had he not gotten hurt, would have been in that group last year. And then Ben Braden's really the question. Ben Braden moves inside to guard. Magnuson goes back out to tackle. So but all 5 of those guys have started games. They all know each other, and if it's not going to work now, it never would have. So I think that they've got to a point where they've got 5 guys who've got a lot of experience. If somebody can have a great camp and steal a job, fine.
Yeah.
But if that position is settled and finally starting to be something that's impactful, then I think it just changes everything for this offense, because then, if you got 3 running backs who are trustworthy and can sort of stay healthy, I think you'll be okay. Finding
holes.
Yeah. And have some vision. Vision needs to be corrected.
Yeah.
And with Derek Green, Davion Smith, Drake Johnson was the only one that seemed to not struggle with that, but he's also, as you wrote, working back up to full health. So.
Yep. And in terms of that line, also won't be uncommon to see 2 tight ends out there.
Nope.
Sometimes in the backfield, talking with Jake Butt, he fully expects guys are going to be lined up. Fullback, on the line, split out. There will be multiple tight ends on the field at any given time.
The funny part about this offense, too, is there's a ton of they'll use a ton of formations and a ton of motions and weird things that look really confusing, but it's ultimately, a handful of running. The running playbook isn't as complex as it used to not be when he was at Stanford and even with the 49ers, but the offense does a lot of stuff to try to confuse the defense, and it's constantly setting up other things, other areas. But you're right, you do get a lot of guys on the field who have to, your H-backs, your fullbacks, your double tights, all that sort of stuff. So it's going to be a power team, and that's why that's staying on schedule. You got to find a way to keep yourself in front of the sticks and give yourself a chance. Then ultimately you got to find playmakers.
Who's the most talented running back?
That's a hard one for me to say. I think physically, if everyone's in shape and everyone's where they need to be, let's say everyone's in the best shape they can be in, I think the most talented player is Ty Isaac.
Okay.
But does that matter? If he's not ready to go, then that doesn't really matter, because I think that if we go off of what we've seen from all these guys in college, the guy who had the most impressive stretch to me of any of them, and Ty Isaac hasn't played much, was Drake Johnson.
Surely.
And I think Drake Johnson, when he's healthy, is probably the best back on the team. I think that's, and that's my opinion, and that's the opinion of some other people too. So I think that's a real thing. It's just a matter of when's his knee going to get. I mean, how far along does that go? But I think if Drake Johnson's healthy, then I would have a hard time not maybe putting a bet on him as being the guy that does it.
He said to us last week that he feels like he's full speed. He's not allowed to go full speed though.
Well, they got to be careful because it's just 2 knee injuries on one knee.
All it takes is one bad cut.
He could feel great, but
but at the same time, I think you're right. I think he runs with the least hesitancy. I think he runs with the most kind of just make a decision and just go. He finds holes.
Has a better natural feel for it. It seems like.
I think he can outrun guys. He can go over guys. Whereas Derek Green maybe he can go over you, but
he wasn't running away from anybody.
He's not getting a lot of separation.
At least not last year anyway.
Ty Isaac, I don't know. You probably know better.
We don't. I mean, and we can. What you're basing Ty Isaac on is basically measurables, things you've seen in small glimpses and small bursts.
He's a big dude.
He's a big guy who has great feet, who can move and can run through people, and has an ability at times to run away from a pack. He can catch the ball. He has everything he needs. Now he has to prove it, because Jim Harbaugh didn't. There were a ton of times this offseason where people were like, well, "What about Ty Isaac?" And he's like, "I got to see something from Ty Isaac." Other than him staying on the sideline nursing a small injury or whatever it is. And I think that sometimes silence with Jim Harbaugh is as loud as anything else, which means if you're not doing what you need to do to be healthy and on the field at all times, then he's looking right past you or right through you in some instances. And this is a big camp for a guy like Ty Isaac, because he didn't do anything in the spring. Harbaugh said he practiced full once. So he's got to prove something, and he's got to prove a lot, because there's other guys who were healthy, and you got Drake Johnson, who's not going to back down from any challenge when he's healthy. So it should be interesting.
And Harbaugh did say at the press conference when Drake Johnson's name came up, one of the first things he said was he's one of my favorite guys. And anyone
who's too, same thing.
Anyone who's dealt with him, he's a charismatic, confident, very intelligent,
task-oriented guy,
young guy. He's an interesting character to speak with. You brought up the $1 million name, Jim Harbaugh. So last week
$40 million name
went about as expected. I think we said here that we were expecting very little to come out of Michigan Media Day, even Big Ten Media Day, and that was indeed the case. But with this whole submarine, the whole going off the grid, while it's annoying for those who have a
job to do outside of the team, I guess.
Dependency on providing readers with content. I get it, because this team and this was a very, in my short time here, I always thought that this is a very fragile, kind of meek group of guys that always said the right thing and always walked the right way. But when push comes to shove, they never had it. They never had that big, thick backbone that would.
I think the word you're looking for that you're maybe tiptoeing around is soft.
They were soft, So
a soft football program.
You do. I think he needed to take them behind closed doors and beat the hell out of them for a couple weeks.
No, I do. I agree. I mean, obviously it's frustrating for us, and that's fine. Whatever, they don't care about us.
Right.
But I totally understand it, and I thought it made sense, and I thought that some of the stuff we heard from some of the guys, and that just that they didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
Like I've never heard that before.
Yeah,
where
that was crazy.
They go in. It's military style in a lot of ways, and maybe that's a Jim Minnick influence. Maybe that's Harbaugh just being like, this is what we're gonna go get real raw here. Yeah. But I'm telling you, they went in on that Thursday for media day, and they didn't know, as of that Thursday afternoon, they didn't know what time practice started Friday, which meant it could have started at 3 in the morning, 5 in the morning, 7 in the morning. Whenever somebody knocked on the door and pulled them out of bed was when they had to get going and be at their best. So there was just this level of, we don't really know what's going to happen, but we've been told to prepare for everything and expect the worst. And that means that, who knows? I mean, who knows? One day he could say, we're going to take all the hours that are supposed to be allotted tomorrow, we're going to do them all this day, as many as we possibly can, just because I said so. Right. So that your mind, you think you're only going to be out here for like 2 hours, but maybe we'll be out here for 4.
Yep.
And you won't be, and we're going to see who can handle that. And because that's ultimately the part of it too, is he has to find out, Harbaugh, and he doesn't know this yet, I don't think, who he can count on, who his guys are, who's close and who's nowhere near close.
Yeah.
And you do this for a week to 10 days, and you really put these guys in uncomfortable spots, and you'll find that out pretty quick.
And I know out in Chicago, a Big Ten media day, I'm going to say it was James Ross, when sitting at a table with him. Maybe it was Joe Bolden, one of the two, I'm sorry. But when discussing the 4-hour practices in the spring, mentioned that Harbaugh had said to them pretty early in the process that when he went through the numbers and just the statistics through game by game stats, that one trend all the way through was that they were at their worst basically mid to the end of the third quarter and into the fourth quarter, which shows durability, endurance, all of those things. And that was I think that was the precipice of the 4-hour spring practices. While yes, it was to deliver a message, it was also because this team wasn't in good shape to win games at the end. You saw it a million times,
mentally and physically. Physically, sometimes you'd see the defense would get a little gassed, but more than physical, mentally, I think was the biggest. This was a mentally weak, I don't know how else to say it, mentally weak football team, just from every single mistake thing that we would see, the same repeated errors, the can't get enough guys on the field for a punt team, all this stuff. I mean, it was just screamed of a program that was just basically mentally weak, in a program that wasn't being pushed, and not necessarily, maybe some skill development areas, people will say it that, guys weren't being developed in certain skill areas, but more than anything else, they just weren't being pushed to do anything. They weren't being pushed out of their comfort zone. They weren't even asked to, sidestep out of their comfort zone in any way. They were coddled, frankly, in many instances, with us all the time. We would talk about this a lot, where there were certain guys that, he had a rough day, and he just doesn't. We don't need him to talk to anybody because he's a 22-year-old kid. Yeah. It's like, well, at some point, if that kid wants to play in the NFL, he's going to have to understand that maybe not everything's as easy as it sounds. There was just a lot of coddling going on.
They needed to be men when it came up to making a point that these guys are men and da-da-da-da. Yeah. But then when it was
it got difficult,
when it was convenient,
this is just a boy.
When they were convenient, they were sons and children and all and all that stuff. In terms of us, and we'll be wrapping this up, but for those curious about such things, we still don't know when the curtain's going to be drawn back.
We're doing this on Tuesday, so maybe as of Thursday.
It's very well could be the case. I'm kind of curious to see what these guys look like when we actually see them. Is it going to be wide-eyed, right? Yeah. Walking in like old Civil War soldiers, with its wrapped legs, wooden crutches and things like that. We'll see. I mean, the interesting part was they had no idea what they were getting themselves into, and I think they learned it probably pretty quickly and pretty violently.
And the good thing, I think, for them is that there's not a lot of guys on this team that, and there might have been some in the past, but I think for the most part, you have a pretty good core group of guys who will force people to buy into this. And that when I say that, the culture issues they had were that these just were guys that just weren't being pushed. I didn't ever really get the sense that it was guys that were resisting it. They just weren't doing it because they weren't being told to do it. It wasn't like a culture of, I'm not doing it because I don't feel like it. I don't want to do that. That's not, I don't ever think that really happened. It was just they were getting away with what they were allowed to get away with necessarily. So I think that it'll benefit them, and I think it'll be something where you see some sooner than later, impact by going through something like this that they've never had before. Because I do think at the end of the day they have a core of older guys who really are just, they've been beat to death over the last couple of years.
Be tired
they've just been worn out. From outside stuff, from people just saying they're horrible, all this, that, and the other, and all this expectation you got to live up to, and they're not even close. I sense that you got a little bit of what it was like in 2011, where you had a lot of guys who were older who were like, I am just tired of this. Those were the guys that went through the Rich Rod stuff, and then they said, forget this, I don't care who our coach is, we're going to do this. And I feel like you've got a little bit of that going on. How much of it we'll see, but I feel like there's a little bit of that kind of building, and I think that'll be to Harbaugh's benefit.
Still need to prove the most basic question, that there's enough talent on this team to win games. We'll find that out soon enough. So that's it for today. There was a very large staff-wide meeting here. Neither Nick nor I were laid off or anything, so that's good. So it looks like we'll be with you for this.
Again, we only filmed this on Tuesday
for this season. That's a good point. So that's it for this episode 4 of the Wolverine Beat. For Nick Baumgardner, I'm Brendan Quinn. Thanks for watching.